Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The cosmos had always thrummed with a delicate balance. Stars were born, civilizations rose, and heroes emerged to stand against forces that threatened peace. But today that balance was shattered not by anything from their universe, but from beyond it, something far more ancient and far more dangerous. Tony Stark, known to many simply as Iron Man, stood at the helm of his latest Stark Tech monitoring station, deep within space. His eyes, narrowed as the warning lights, blared across his system. Something big was coming, something that made every other threat he defaced look small by comparison. The data on his screen painted a terrifying picture. A rift in space stretching into multiple dimensions was growing rapidly. Through it, a force of unimaginable power was making its way into their reality. Friday. Confirmed readings. Tony barked at his AI assistant. Confirmed, boss. This isn't tea. Like anything we've had in. The energy signature is unquantifiable. It's spreading through multiple dimensions simultaneously. We're looking at a level of destruction that could wipe out everything. Tony finished, his voice gripped. For a moment, the enormity of the situation weighed on him. Tony had always been able to rely on his intellect, on his technology to find solutions. But this was beyond just technology. This was something primal, something that would require more than just his invention. With a deep breath, he activated his comms, sending an urgent signal across dimension. If there was ever a time for heroes to unite, it was now. The multiverse needed all hands on deck. Clark Kent, known to the world as Superman, felt a shift in the air. His senses, honed from years of fighting threats to Earth, tingled with the familiar pulse of danger, but this time it was different. It wasn't just Earth that was at risk. He could feel the fabric of reality itself trembling. The moment Tony's signal came through, Clark wasted no time. In a blur of red and blue, he shot through the sky, breaking the sound barrier. As he flew toward the designated meeting point, Stark Tower, rebuilt and rebranded as a multiverse nexus. Within minutes, Clark landed gracefully on the platform outside the tower, his cape fluttering in the breeze. Tony was already waiting, his armored suit gleaming in the sun, arms crossed, brow furrowed in concentration. Tony greeted him with a curt nod. Tony, what's so going on? Superman asked, concerted into his face. Tony's response was direct. We've got a multiversal incursion. Something big and ugly is coming through from multiple dimensions. I don't have all the details yet, but the readings are off the charts. It's bad, Clark. Really bad. Superman, jaw tightened. Who else have you contacted? Everyone. We were going to need all the help we can get. As the hours passed, heroes from across dimensions began to arrive, each one answering the call. Some were familiar faces, others less so, but all of them had one thing in common. They were the best of the best. Among them was an ancient sorceress, her eyes glowing with arcane power, a marksman who never missed his target, a cybernetic warrior from a dimension where technology had completely fused with biology, and a towering muscle-bound hero who could bend steel with his bare hands. But despite the impressive display of power gathered at Stark Tower, there was tension in the air. Tony's pragmatic, often cold approach to leadership had rubbed some the wrong way in the past, and even now there were murmurs of dissent among the group. Some questioned his motives, others his strategy. Clark, ever the mediator, tried to keep things calm, but even he couldn't deny that there was a growing rift between the heroes. The arrival of the last group of heroes brought the tension to a boil. A dark-skinned warrior queen from a dimension that had been ravaged by war approached Tony, her eyes blazing with fury. You think you can lead us, Stark, who's never seen your people burn, who's never watched your world collapse into ashes? Tony's jaw clenched. I know what it means to lose everything. Don't cheat, assume you know me just because I haven't been through your exact hell. We're all in this together. If we don't stand united, none of us will survive. Clark stepped between them, his deep voice cutting through the growing argument. Enough, we don't have time for this. Whatever is coming, it's not going to wait for us to sort out our differences. We need to focus on the mission. Tony shot Clark, a glance, his expression unreadable. The two of them had worked together countless times, but there had always been an underlying tension between them. Tony's reliance on technology and Clark's near-godlike abilities made for an uneasy partnership at times, but now more than ever they needed to find common ground. The first sign of the approaching force came without warning. A ripple tore through the fabric of reality, distorting the air around them. The sky turned dark, the stars above flickering, as if they were being snuffed out one by one. A massive tear opened in the sky, and from it emerged the dark entity that Tony had feared. It was a being of pure malice, its form shifting and undulating as if it were made of shadow itself. Its presence was suffocating, a weight that pressed down on the hearts and minds of every hero gathered below. The entity spoke, its voice a cacophony of whispers, and screamed, "Your time is over, heroes. The multiverse will fall, and I shall be its end." The heroes reacted immediately. Tony's suit whirred to life as he took to the skies, energy blasts firing from his palm. Superman followed, his fists clenched as he rocketed toward the entity. The others followed suit, each hero unleashing their powers in an attempt to push the dark force back. But the entity was prepared. With a wave of its hand, it summoned an army of creatures from the rift beings made of the same shadowy substance, their forms twisting and contorting as they charged at the heroes. The battle was on. For hours, the fight raged across the skies and through dimension. The heroes gave everything they had, but the entity was relentless. It seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment, feeding on the chaos and destruction around it. Tony found himself cornered, his suit's energy reserves running low as he faced off against a swarm of shadow creatures. Just when he thought he was outmatched, a blur of red and blue appeared at his side. Superman, Zeus, crashed into the creatures, sending them flying back, their forms dissipating into nothingness. "I've got your back, Tony," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Tony's eyes flicked to Clark, a mixture of gratitude and frustration on his face. "Thanks, but we need to find a way to stop this thing for good." Clark nodded. As the battle dragged on, the heroes began to realize the true scope of the entity's power. It wasn't just attacking them physically, it was attacking them mentally, exploiting their fears and insecurities. Tony's mind raced with doubts about his leadership, about whether he could truly protect those around him. Clark was haunted by memories of worlds he couldn't save, of people who had been lost despite his best effort. The entity's voice echoed in their minds, whispering lies, feeding on their deepest fears. "You are not enough. You will fail. Your world will burn." Tony's fist clenched, his mind reeling. He had never been one to back down from a challenge. But this was different. For the first time in a long time, he felt doubt creeping into his heart. But then he looked at Clark, saw the determination in his eye. He saw the other heroes still fighting, still pushing forward despite the odds. They weren't tired of giving up, neither would he. As the battle reached its peak, Tony and Clark realized that brute force alone wouldn't be enough to defeat the entity. They needed a plan, a way to outsmart the being and trap it within its own dimension. "We need to sever its connection to the multiverse," Tony said, his voice urgent as he and Clark regrouped. "If we can close the rift, it'll be stuck in its own dimension." Clark nodded, his mind already working on the logistics. How do we do that?" Tony's eyes flickered with the spark of an idea. "I have a prototype, a weapon designed to disrupt dimensional energy. It's risky, but if it works, we can trap the entity inside its own dimension and close the rift for good." Clark's brow furrowed. "And if it doesn't work?" Tony shrugged, a grim smile on his face. "And we were all toast, but it's the best shot we've got." With the plan set in motion, Tony and Clark rallied the remaining heroes for one final push. This was their last chance. They couldn't afford to fail. As they charged toward the entity once more, Tony activated the prototype, its energy building to a crescendo. The dark entity, sensing the shift in power, let out a roar of fury, its form expanding as it tried to engulf the hero. But they were ready. The dark entity surged forward, its form expanding like a tidal wave of pure malevolence. The sky above twisted and churned, reflecting the chaos below. Tony's suit whirred as the energy from the prototype reached critical level. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. The make or break point. If the device worked, they had a chance. If not, there wouldn't really be a universe left to worry about. Superman flew ahead, cutting through the air with precision, using his heat vision to clear a path through the shadow creatures still swarming around them. Every muscle in his body was tensed, ready for the final blow. He trusted Tony. He always had, even when their methods clashed. Right now, there was no room for doubt. They were beyond differences in strategy or leadership. This was about survival. As they pushed toward the core of the dark entity, Tony could see its center pulsing with an eerie glow. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered, its form constantly shifting, as if it was made of the very fabric of space and time. Superman glanced back at him, his eyes glowing with the power of his heat vision. "You ready, Tony?" he called out over the din of the battle. Tony nodded, his face grim behind his mask. "Let's finish this." Superman took the lead, plunging directly toward the entity's heart, his fists blazing with energy as he broke through the final line of defense. The dark entity howled in rage, sending out tendrils of darkness to ensnare him, but Superman was too fast, too strong. He dodged and weaved, his movements almost a blur as he reached the core. Tony hovered just behind him, waiting for his moment. The prototype's energy readings were spiking, but they were unstable if he didn't react soon. The entire thing could overload. But there was no time for hesitation. Tony lined up his shot, took a deep breath, and fired. The beam of energy from the prototype shot forward, a brilliant arc of light cutting through the darkness. It slammed into the entity's core, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The dark entity let out a deafening roar, its form convulsing as the energy disrupted its connection to the multiverse. Tony felt a surge of hope. It was working. The entity writhed and twisted, its shape collapsing in on itself as the prototype's energy disrupted the dimensional rift. Around them, the shadow creatures began to disintegrate, their forms unraveling into nothingness as their master's power waned. But it wasn't over yet. The dark entity, despite its weakening state, still had one last trick up its sleeve. With a final desperate surge of energy, it lashed out, sending a shockwave of dark matter, crashing into Tony and Superman. Tony's suit blared warning signals as the impact knocked him back, his systems struggling to stay online. Superman was hurled across the battlefield, slamming into the ground with enough force to create a crater. For a moment, everything went silent. Tony's vision blurred as his HUD flickered, his suit barely holding together. He forced himself to stand, ignoring the searing pain shooting through his body. Through the haze, he saw Superman rise from the crater, his cape torn but his resolve unbroken. The dark entity was weakening, its form flickering as it struggled to maintain its hold on this dimension. But it wasn't finished yet. Tony could see it. It was still trying to reopen the rift, still trying to escape and continue its rampage across the multiverse. Tony staggered forward, his hand shaking as he activated the prototype's signal sequence. This was their last chance. If he could just amplify the energy one more time, they could close the rift for good. But the strain on his suit was immense. He didn't know if it could handle the overload. Superman, sensing the urgency of the situation, soared back into the air. He flew straight toward the entity's core, his fists blazing with renewed energy. "I'll hold it off," he shouted to Tony. "Do what you need to do." With a final burst of strength, Superman plunged into the heart of the entity, his powerful form colliding with the dark energy. The entity screamed in agony, its form collapsing further under the relentless assault. Tony knew this was it. He had one shot. He adjusted the prototype settings, pushing it to the absolute limit. His suit groaned in protest, but he ignored the warnings with a final determined breath. Tony fired. The beam of energy shot forward once more, this time brighter, more intense than before. It slammed into the core, and the dark entity let out a final earth-shattering scream. Its form imploded, collapsing into itself as the rift began to close. Tony watched, his heart pounding in his chest as the rift sealed shut. The darkness faded, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was silence. Superman hovered in the air, his breathing heavy, but he was alive. He turned to Tony, giving him a weary but triumphant nod. "You did it." Tony collapsed to one knee, his suit finally giving out. He let out a shaky laugh, relief washing over him like a tidal wave. "We did it." The other heroes began to regroup, gathering around the now closed rift. The battle was over, but the scars it left behind were deep. They had faced the worst the multiverse had to offer, and they had survived. But as Tony looked around at the gathered heroes, he knew that things would never be the same. The trust that had been shattered during the battle would take time to rebuild. There were wounds that went beyond the physical wounds that would take longer to heal. Superman landed beside him, offering him a hand. "Well, I'll make sure this never happens again." Tony took his hand, pulling himself to his feet. "Yeah, let's just hope the multiverse gives us a break for a while." They stood there together, side by side, watching as the remnants of the battle slowly faded into the background. The universe had been saved for now. But Tony knew deep down that there would always be another threat, another battle. That was the price of being a hero. The multiverse was vast, filled with dangers they couldn't even begin to comprehend. But as long as they stood together, as long as they trusted each other, they could face whatever came next. And as the stars above slowly began to shine again, Tony allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. They had won. They had survived. For now, that was enough.